Okay. You can follow on the page, on the side that says candle lighting ceremony. We're beginning with participant number 1.
The memory of the helpless infants, children, and teenagers who were cut down like young trees before their time, before they had a chance to experience life.
We shall not forget.
In memory of all the others who died with their children in their arms.
We shall not forget.
In memory of all mothers and fathers who were cruelly separated from their families.
We shall not forget.
In memory of all scholars, teachers, rabbis who were the first to be seized and killed by the Germans.
In memory of the heroes of the resistance who fought the Nazis, so few against so many.
We shall not forget.
In memory of the martyrs who gave their lives to help their brothers and sisters under the Nazis.
We shall not forget.
Please turn the page over. Sima will lead us in the Mourner's Kaddish. If you would like to rise or able to rise, you may do so at this time.
יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה, וילמד דברי שירותי וימליך מלכותי, וחייכונו וימליכונו וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ומאה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתברך, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעולם אין כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירם באמו ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיים, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרמיו, והוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
This was the prayer of mourning, and it's actually a prayer in which we praise God's holiness, for those of you who are not familiar with the Mourner's Kaddish. Thank you. At this time, I thank everyone who helped to light a candle. You may go back to your seats.
You have to have the mic. Okay.
I was trying to arrange to have a program for Yom HaShoah. It's a very important observance every year. And I was thrilled when Sadie came to me one day and said that she would love to have the opportunity to share her very personal story with all of us. She had done this a few years back, but I have not yet heard it, so I'm really excited to have this opportunity. When World War II ended, Sadie was a 22-year-old who was sent to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp by the Jewish Relief Organization right after the camp had been liberated. Her job was to organize a children's home for 83 Jewish orphans. She spent a year there and ultimately helped these children relocate to new lives in Palestine. So I am very pleased to introduce Sadie Hofstein, who will address the children of Bergen-Belsen, a very personal experience. Sadie.
It was in 1943, more than 70 years ago, and London was being bombarded by the Germans every single night. We spent most of our time in air raid shelters, and there was nothing to do but listen to the radio. And the radio stories were horrendous. All we were hearing was horror stories out of Europe. Trains going to Poland, extermination centers, crematorium, the success of Hitler's goal to exterminate the European Jewish community. And it was while I was listening to that radio that I heard an announcement that there was a new organization called the Jewish Committee for Relief Abroad, and they were organizing volunteers who would stand ready to go to Europe as the war, which would hopefully turn on our side, would be over, to go to Europe to seek out remaining Jews and to try and give help. And I decided I would volunteer for that organization. So my story starts on the top of a London bus. I'm sitting on the bus and I'm practicing what I would say to them to tell them how good I was. And as my bio improved, so did my chutzpah. I had really only had several courses in early childhood education. I was working in a nursery school. I was an assistant to an assistant to an assistant teacher, but I was in my head telling them how wonderful I was with kids and how they ought to take me. When I got to the interview, I was quite taken aback. There were dozens and dozens of people there, and many of them were much, much older than I was, and I thought they'll never take me. But much to my surprise, I discovered that there were people who were applying for the team leader's job and the social worker job and for cooks and for drivers. But I was the only one applying for the child welfare job. I was the only one who wanted to work for children. So they took me on, and I began to go into training. The training was absolutely marvelous. I spent time at a very famous Tavistock clinic, at the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, a month in Anna Freud's nursery school. I enjoyed every minute of the training, but I have to tell you, it had nothing to do with the work that we eventually had to do in Europe. Nothing to do with that at all. Now, it was close in the fall of 1944 that the first unit was organized, and that was sent to Italy, 6 men and 6 women. I was not allowed to go on that unit because I was not yet 21, and I thought, well, that's the end of my life. But several weeks later, they organized the second unit, and I was allowed to go on that unit, and we were bound for Germany. Now, here we were, 6 men and 6 women, and you need to understand that we were mostly from poor Jewish homes, or at the very most, middle-class Jewish homes. And although the continent was only 25 miles away, we had never been there. Most of us had never been there. So here we were, bound for Antwerp, which we knew was one of the most thriving ports in the world. As we moved across the channel and Antwerp came into view, we were absolutely horrified. It was a totally dead city. There wasn't a soul on the quayside. The buildings were either down to the ground or totally damaged. And we looked at Antwerp aghast and we said, this is the whole of Europe. There's nobody left. We have come too late. Now in Antwerp there were other units that joined us, the British Red Cross, the Friends, the Quakers, and when we got there they said to us, you are going to Brussels. We hadn't the foggiest idea how we were going to get to Brussels, but they said, don't worry, we're going to take you on in a convoy. Those of you who know me will be happy to know that I wasn't one of the drivers, but I was sitting in the ambulance next to my friend Mandy, and we started in the convoy going to Brussels. We had driven for about 2 hours when Mandy, the driver, said to me, Sadie, I have to urinate. I said, I'm sorry, Mandy, you can't urinate. We get out of this convoy, we'll never get to Brussels. She went on driving. An hour later, she said, Sadie, I really have to urinate. So I looked around and I thought, I better be creative. And I found a big cookie tin at the bottom of the ambulance. And I said to Mandy, raise yourself, I'll put the cookie tin underneath you and you can urinate. Did she urinate? A whole cookie tin full of urine, which she proceeds to give to me, and I sit on my lap. Well, I wasn't going to sit there with the urine on my lap. The ambulance only had half a window, half was open. So I threw the urine out of the ambulance, and at that moment there's hooting and tooting and the whole convoy stops and they run towards us, and I said, oh my God, it's against army regulations to urinate in a cookie tin. And they came up and they said to us, you out. Went to Mandy, you out. And when we got to Brussels, we heard the story. The car behind us was watching us, and he said to his buddy, you know, look at that car in front. It's weaving from side to side. Sure, it was weaving from side to side. You can't urinate and keep the car on track. But he said, as soon as I saw the liquor come out of the window, I knew that they were drunk. Well, anyway, they took us to Brussels and they gave us the sobriety test, and they realized that we were really quite sober, and they let us go on. Now, I haven't seen Mandy for years and years and years. She married a South African. She went to South Africa. But just before I came to Martin's Run, I met her on Hampstead Heath in London, and we started telling that story to each other again. And we were so hysterical with laughter, we really needed that cookie tin all over again. Anyway, we got to Brussels and we were assigned to Holland, and we arrived at a little village called Grave on VE Day. And before they started the celebration, they lined up the collaborators and they shot them. We were then on the road to Rotterdam. We arrived in Rotterdam the day it was liberated. Rotterdam had been under siege for 4 weeks. There had been no food coming into the city and the people were starving. The Americans and British knew this, and they were flying food over the city. But as they dropped the food, as you know, Rotterdam is laced with canals, and so most of the food was falling into the water. So when we arrived in Rotterdam, the adults, the children were absolutely starving. We contacted the underground and they said the best thing you could do is start a hospital for children and pick them up. And we broke our unit into 3 groups. One went to set up the hospital, the other went to find staff, and 3 of us, 3 women, went to find supplies. We found a major who was in charge of Rotterdam, and he said, look, you don't have to worry. There's a warehouse called Ponchina in the south side of Rotterdam. It has everything that you need for your hospital. Gave us a little note to say we were entitled to have anything we want from the warehouse. And being totally dumb and inexperienced, it was getting dark, the 3 of us went off to this house, this really rotten part of Rotterdam, to the warehouse. And as we drove up, another jeep drove up with some military men in it, and they jumped out. And I jumped out and I said, look, I have this note. It says that I can have all the materials in this warehouse. And he said, lady, I haven't come to get the materials. I've come to get the Germans out. And they went into the warehouse and they brought out 10 Germans that were hiding there. But I have to tell you, it was the only time that we were really in danger. And so the next morning we went into the warehouse, and there really was everything that we needed for the hospital, done in perfect German style. The sheets were so sweat, there wasn't an inch out of place. And down in the basement we discovered that they had about 50 famous paintings. They were Van Goghs and Rembrandts and Renoir that they had stolen from the Dutch, and millions of German marks that were totally worthless because that day they had dishonored that currency. Well, the hospital stayed. We stayed and we set up the hospital, and it stayed for about 10 years. It was called Shalom Hospital. And at that point, I received a message from my organization in London telling me to contact an organization called the OPK that had hidden Jewish children during the war. I went to the OPK, introduced myself. I was the first person they had seen from the outside. And indeed, they had a perfectly wonderful file list of 5,000 Jewish children that they had hidden. And we talked about it, and the man in charge said to me, listen, I want to tell you something. If parents come back for those children, of course we'll give them back. If older brothers and sisters come back for the children, we'll give them back too. But if distant relatives come back claiming that they want the children, we have no intention of giving them back. I have no idea what his motivation or their motivation really was, but fortunately I didn't have to settle that problem. It was settled months later in the World Court. At that time, we went down to the Amsterdam Railroad and we set up a small table with a Magen David to let people know that Jewish people could come and talk to us. And we sat there for a very long time, and only one woman showed up, and she said, I have a child. I had given the child away to an organization. I said, yes, we know. We'll take you to the organization. We took her there. Indeed, they had a record of the child. The child was about 50 miles away in a small village. And I said, come, we'll take you there. We drove to the village, and before I let the woman go into the house, I went in myself and I introduced myself. I told them that the mother of the child was there, and they were the family was absolutely hysterical. When the mother went in to see the child hadn't remembered her at all. She hadn't the foggiest idea who she was. And she absolutely would have nothing to do with her. So we had to take the mother back to Amsterdam without the child. We understood that many months later she was able to reconcile with her child. Now, we were very frustrated. So we went to the man who was in charge of relief work in Amsterdam, and we said, look, we're happy to work here. Certainly there's work to do, but we're Jews. And we really are part of a Jewish relief unit, and we came primarily